Hello, welcome to Iris Cottage. I'm Suzanne Miner of Quirky Sue's Designs, and this is my studio. Quirky Sue's Designs has one-of-a-kind jewelry as Quirky Sue's Jewelry, mind pliers, which are a sort of fun way of looking at life. I have pens, pictures, posters, greeting cards, and so on, with a combination of vintage pictures, pictures that I have taken, and then just some things I wanted to throw in because, I could. And then Iris Cottage Creations. Iris Cottage Creations is paper projects, kits, patterns, coloring books, paper dolls, and a variety of other sort of yarn art kind of things. And today we're representing Iris Cottage Creations and the project Little Matchbox Suitcases. Thank you for purchasing this. I hope you have fun with it. And here's the tutorial. Your digital download file has several pages with information for you. The supplies that you need, we'll talk about those a little bit more. Instructions, and I've gone through kind of step by step what to do. And I know most people follow directions fairly well, but sometimes it helps to have someone show you as well as have it written out. So that's why I'm making this tutorial. You have a practice page, kind of a generic size. Now you have options for printing your suitcases. You can do heavy paper. I prefer cardstock. You might even choose to use photo paper. The only caution with photo paper is that it may be a little bit harder to work with if it is very thick or very slick, but it will make your colors nice and bright. The next pages depend on which file you purchased, but they essentially go like this. Your little tiniest suitcase, then number 2, number 3, then with number 4, it takes 2 pages to do outside and inside. Same thing with number 5. It's even a little bit larger. And then the last page of your file is some legal information. This project is my property. You are purchasing this to use for non-commercial purposes. That means you cannot sell the file, either digital or printed. You cannot charge people to take a lesson in making these. If you want to take this to a copy shop to have copies made, you'll need to take this page with you, and you have permission to make 20 copies. If you are just printing on your home computer and printer, you can make as many as you would like. If you want to assemble the suitcases and use them for a fundraiser project, you may do that. However, make sure that you give credit to Iris Cottage Creations before you do that. I think this is a fun project, and it's good for a lot of different ages and a lot of different uses. So let's talk supplies and equipment. This is my preferred glue. It dries clear. It gives you a little bit of working time. It doesn't just instantly grab a hold. I like the smaller size. Makes it a little bit easier to hold as you're working with these papers. And then you can also cut the tip off fairly small and let you make a fine line of glue. I use different sizes of scissors depending on which part of the project I'm working on. If I'm just getting the larger pieces cut out and doing straight lines, I'll use a fairly large pair of scissors. This pair of scissors has an extremely sharp tight point to it. It's good for working around the smaller corners, even working around the latch and the hinges on your suitcase, or the handles rather, on the front. You might even want to use a razor knife to get around the fine corners and again around the latch and lock pieces. I use a straight edge when I'm folding this project. It helps me to get the lines nice and neat and smooth, and it just gives a little bit more control as you're maneuvering the pieces of paper around. The last tool that I usually use is called a bone folder. This is used for pressing down pieces, getting into the corners, making the edges nice and crisp, and so on. If you don't have a bone folder, you can use something like a popsicle stick or a marker, just something that will help you press down smoothly and evenly as you fold pieces. So those are the guys that you need. And if you're working with glue, it's always helpful to have a damp paper towel or a wet sponge or a wet wipe around just to clean your fingers off, because you will undoubtedly get some glue on them. So we have all of our supplies together, including a wet wipe for when I have glue on my fingers. And one more thing you're going to want to have is a black marker. Now, if you don't have a bone folder, this part of the marker works really well for rubbing down the edges, getting into the corners and so on, and making nice crisp folds on your inside box. But its real value is if you make a little mistake or there's a little bit of white showing where there shouldn't be, you can just color it over with the black marker. Are you ready to start making suitcases? Okay, it is time to start cutting. And like I said, I usually use my big scissors for these larger parts. For most of the suitcase, you want to cut either just a little bit in the line or right alongside the black line. These outside edges are a little bit more forgiving than the inside edges are. So when I get to this part, which is the clasp and the locks, I just do this little number right here, and I will come back and get the details after a bit. So then I go to the other pieces, and depending on which suitcase you're working on, the arrangement of how they're printed together will vary. So here I'm just going to cut this part off. This is the inside lining of the box. For this one, you'll want to cut just to the inside of the black line. And this is the easiest piece on here because there's no folding, there's no more cutting after this. It's just a matter of lay it in place with some glue. Okay, so that's going to set aside. Then I'm going to go to the handles. Now the handles are probably the trickiest part of the whole thing. So I've made the instructions for it a little bit easier than it might look like right up top. So first thing is, we're going to cut across both of the tabs. We're going to come up and around and knock off that chunk of it. And then we're going to come up to the tabs on this side. Now, this is the first piece that you're going to glue, and the reason that we're doing it very first is that it needs to dry before you put it in place. So here's where our straight edge comes in handy. I'm going to go up here. I'm going to make a fold right in that black line. Okay. And if I don't have it just right, I can just kind of work it back and forth over this straight edge and it will get to the right spot. Okay. So now I'm going to take the straight edge and lay it right here. These are the tabs that are going to be glued on. So I'm going to use that straight edge and I'm just going to press back against it so that those guys are going to stay out of the way when I start putting glue on this. Turn it around. Do the same thing on the other side. Now, don't get terribly uptight if you make a little bit of an error or they aren't quite perfectly folded. This one's actually kind of forgiving. Okay, so we now have a handle taco. I'm going to take my glue. If I can get it open. Take my glue, put it in here. And it doesn't take a whole lot of glue. You don't want to make it too runny. Then I'm going to close that up. Make sure my little folds are back here so that they're not getting glued. And then I'm just going to set it aside and go back to cutting. So again, with my big scissors, I'm going to cut the things that I don't have to be real fine about. Now, in the instructions, it says on these tabs that you might want to trim around the edges. When you make your practice suitcase, you're going to be looking at some of the aesthetics of it. And one of those is, do you want black seams showing in the lining in the bottom of your suitcase? If you don't, you're going to trim these off. If it doesn't bother you, you can leave them on. It's a choice. Okay, so I've done the things with the big scissors. Now I'm going to go to my smaller scissors. I'm going to cut down here. And I'm going to cut most of the black off of these tabs. Now guys, here's a spot where you want to be careful. If you don't get it quite into the corner, don't just jerk on it and tear it off, because you might tear the whole suitcase and you'll need to start again, which, since you're printing it, you can do that. But if you come around to the back and clip it off, it usually looks a whole lot neater. So I like playing with things that you have to cut out. I've always liked putting together paper projects. Part of Iris Cottage Creations is my paper dolls. And that's a love that's gone back a long, long ways. And I still enjoy doing them. Now, I mentioned these scissors are great because of the sharp tip, and they really are. They're handy for a lot of kinds of projects where you need to be fairly fine about what you're doing. I like them. There's different brands available, different ways of closing them here. This one just has a slide on it and it locks it closed. Some of them have a case for the tips to protect those, but it helps you keep the tips nice and sharp. Okay, so we are almost There. And again, what I said about tearing off. And this is where, when you fold these, this is where you might need to use the black marker a little bit. Okay, we're all cut out. So that really doesn't take a terrible amount of time. Now for the last of the fine little bits that need to get done, we need to cut around the latch and the locks, or the lock and the latches, however you want to describe them. I always think of these old suitcases with the hardware showing, unlike the plastic molded things that most of us wind up with nowadays. So if you really want to be particularly fine about this, this is a spot where you could use your razor knife and cut these out really close. And what I look for is I try to avoid having any little sharp corners sticking out, but that's kind of difficult. I also try to get all the little white spots that I can. And just get those pretty nice and neat. Okay? So now it's time to start folding. And I strongly suggest that you fold all of the pieces on this before you start gluing. You fold all of the pieces on this before you start gluing. Because once you have the glue on there, you have to keep working. Okay, I'm going to line up my little hardware pieces here. And I want this line, I want this fold in the line. So I've got it on my straight edge. I can see pretty well where it's going. And I just squish it down. Now, don't crease these really, really hard with your thumbnail because you'll weaken the cardstock. And you don't want to do that. So just a nice fold. And you do the same thing on all of the lines. And I find it easier to do one side and then come over here and do the other side. Okay, now I hope you have some fun plans for what you're going to do with these, because they're really neat little suitcases. Okay, time to glue. We're going to put the glue on here. And again, you don't want it to be real runny. And it's going to dry clear, so if you get a little bit too much, it's not a huge deal. Okay, so I'm going to fold over. I'm going to match up the sides. Make sure that my flap is meeting as far in as it needs to be. I might need to squeeze it a little bit. And then I'm just going to give this a nice squeeze and hold. And then I'll be ready to set it aside. Now I saw as I was going through this, one of those spots where I want to use the black marker. So maybe you can't even see it at all, but right there, there's a little bit more white than I want to show. Now, if you really want to jazz this up, You can do the entire thing with your black marker. Just use the side of it. And that takes away some of those white edges. And you don't really see it, but it just gives it a nice little polished look. Totally up to you how picky you want to be. All right, we're just going to set that one aside. And then we're going to move to the inside. And we're going to do the same thing again. It's a little bit easier on here because you have the cutouts and the tabs and so on. So again, we're going to fold everything before we start gluing. And I find it's easier to go ahead and use the straight edge. You could even use a business card if it's the right size for the suitcase you're working on. Okay, I didn't get this quite folded just right. So I'm just going to kind of work at it a little bit with my fingers and using the straight edge to help support it until I feel like it is right. Okay, I have a little bit of wiggle room, but I want to make them as nice as possible. Okay, so we've got both of those. I don't bother with the straight edge on the tabs. Just will make sure that you're in the black when you fold that. Okay, so we continue around, doing the same thing. And when you get a little bit more confident about it, you might decide that you don't need to bother with the straight edge. That's really up to you. So I fold them and then I fold them back out again so that when it's time for each step, I know where they are. Okay. So again, you're trying to get in the black line. There we go. Okay. So just get things lined up. And fold over. And adjust. Okay, so again, the tabs, I don't really bother with the straight edge. Get those over. One more side. Now again, as I said, you just want to squeeze, you don't want to crease it down so that it tears. Okay, last one. Okay, I always check just to make sure that I've gotten everybody folded. If you kind of drop it down, you can see that it sort of looks like a turtle shell. Okay. So I fold back the pieces that I don't need right at the moment. And then that allows me to get to the ones that I do need. So I have my tabs folded in. I fold the ends in. Put some glue on that tab. And I'm going to close it down. Okay, here's where it's nice. It gives you a little bit of working time. You can turn out here and make sure that your corner's lined up nice. Make sure you have that little towelette handy. Okay. Same thing on the other side. Make sure it's lined up nice. And if I need to pull it loose and squish it back, I can. Okay. Then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Now I'm going to use my bone folder, and I'm just going to go inside here and make sure it's really tightly pressed down. And I'll check the outside. Have a little bit of wiggle room there. Let's go ahead and wiggle that into place and press it down with the folder. Same thing on this one. I can look out here and I can see if it's meeting the edge. And if I like it, I'll push it down. Make sure that tab is stuck down really well. And then flip it around and do the same thing over here. Okay, so you can see the box developing here. Okay, now it's time for my liner. I just take a little bit of glue, go around the bottom, and lay that inside and press it down. Okay. So now I'm going to do the two side tabs, and I colored this one different colors so that you can really clearly see this part right here. This blue is what matches the outside blue, and that's what's going to show. So this tab represents the inside of your box. Okay, so fold these guys out of the way a little bit. Put some glue on here. Fold it in. Sometimes you have to persuade it a little bit. Fold that in. And then we're going to do the bone folder again. And really press that down. Okay. So here's where I was talking about trimming the black. You can see how it leaves a seam right there. That's up to you whether you like it or not. You can decide to trim the black off or leave it on there. Your call. Okay, then the other side, same thing. I'm going to pinch it in, and then I'm going to press it in. And I really want to press into those corners. Okay, I want to make sure they're nicely sealed down. Alrighty. Last for the inside box. Right here again. Might have to persuade it a little bit. Fold it in. And really press it down. Okay, same thing on the other side. Get that pressed in there. And then really rub it down. Okay, so at this point, I'm just going to make sure those corners are pretty square. If I want to come back in with my marker and touch up any of these corners, I can do that. I usually take it and kind of rub it down that way, sort of establishes the shape. And then, the moment of truth, we are going to slide the box into the sleeve. Now, you want it to be snug. So, you might have to just press a little bit, persuade a little bit, and get it in there. Then press it down so that your end comes through. And there we have our box. Now remember, on this end, I colored that edge. On this end, I didn't. Maybe you don't notice a difference, maybe you do. That's one of those optional bits. Okay, so now we go back to our handle. And you can do this with the razor knife if you like. I'm going to do it with these. And I'm just going to choose a side and I'm going to cut. And I'll flip it over and do the other side. Okay, so you can see I didn't get it folded quite evenly, so there's some white there. We're going to come back to that with the black marker. So I'm going to cut the inside. And it might be a little bit still wet from the glue, that's okay. And then I come around here, tuck my scissors up into there, and cut the inside. And then I'll come back over here and I'll give it another trim. So I did not do the best job of getting that thing folded in two. Sorry about that. But here's where our friend the magic marker comes in again. I'm going to go along the edge. I'm going to go in here where it's not folded super well. It's like I'm just adding a black edge back to it. Okay, I'm going to get the edges. So I just don't want any of this white to show. Okay, we'll get this one. And over here. So this is one of those spots where you have a little bit of room for error and also the tip for how to polish it up. Okay. So there we have our little handle, and I'm going to bend the tabs back. Okay. I'm going to line these up so that they have equal space on either side of this latch in the middle. So I'm going to get that figured out, and then I will apply some glue. And I missed a white spot. So I figured out where I want this. I'm going to put the glue on the tabs. Then I will set it back down where I had decided it was going to go. And I'm going to hold this in place while I scoot this one back over. And like I said, the glue dries clear. So I want the front of this lined up with the edge of the lid here. Just give it a nice tap, a nice little persuasion if necessary. Scoot it back so it's in the right spot. And again, this glue gives you a couple of chances here, so I can scoot it around a little bit. And I think I am finished. And there you have your little vintage looking suitcase. With your Matchbox inside. I hope you have a lot of fun with this project. Post pictures here with the video. Show me some of the fun things that you have done with it. And I hope that if you use this to package a special little surprise, that the person who got it really loves it. Enjoy!